If you are someone who is about to bring a poetry book into the world, or maybe you have a poetry book out here, but you don't have one that you can actually physically hold yet, well, today we're going to give you some things that you want to be thinking about because we get to talk with someone who's done it. We're going to be speaking with Bryan Byrdlong, who just released a wonderful collection of poetry with Yes Yes Books called Strange Flowers, which you guys can now also get for yourselves, which is really exciting. So, we're going to talk about the process that he went through to get this book into the world so that way you have some ideas and things maybe for yourselves, in addition to just kind of learning more about poetry, books, and publishing in general. Guys, without further ado, please welcome this very, very, very esteemed Cave Canem poet. I do gotta shout that out. Bryan Byrdlong. What's up, my man?
Hey, what's up, Jeff?
Hey.
Thanks for shouting out Kave Khan. I'm always got a rep.
Always, always, always,
Always.
always. Are you going back this year?
This year, no, I don't think so. But I'm gonna try to go next year.
Do that, because I think that's the anniversary year, right? I think.
Oh, it is
Uh,
big 30, right?
it is, yeah, yeah, yeah. They actually are allowing even graduates like me to come back. So I'm like, maybe if we can make the family
Oh,
work out. Yeah.
oh yeah, 96. Yeah, that's
Hmm.
gonna be special.
It is going to be special. Yeah. Um, what else is special? Sir, you have a book out in the world right now.
Oh wow, it's still so weird to see it in other people's hands.
I saw your on Instagram you had your little unboxing video as you do. Um,
Right.
take me back to that moment, man. It's like you have this box in your hand, you're at your
Yeah.
table.
Yeah. Box came in the mail. Wonderful. And then it sat there for a couple days because I needed my girlfriend to help me do the video, so I had to wait for the
Ah,
weekend.
this is
So it was just sort of sitting there staring at me. Um, but then yeah, and then I opened it and it was just full of the books, and it was the first time I held the book in my hand. So that was really special. It didn't feel. It felt kind of like a dream,
yeah,
almost like yeah, I was sort of speechless. But then
yeah.
yeah, really really special moment.
How just kind of talking about like the publication process. So this was published through Yes Yes. It was through a contest.
Well, yes, yes. I think they had an open reading period.
Okay.
So I did the open reading period, and then yeah, me and two other books were chosen, and then we ultimately decided to sign on with Yes, Yes.
Hmm.
Um, that was that process. That's a good question because I had previously only understood first poetry books as being through an initial contest,
Hmm.
but with Yes, Yes, I learned that that isn't always the case.
So then, how long ago was this? Because I think we all know in the publishing world that it's like, all right, so you get the acceptance, you sign the
Yeah,
papers, and then it's like, all right, well, we'll see your book next year, or we'll see your book like
yeah.
a pretty long time for like what was it for Yes Yes?
So I got the initial acceptance or the offer August 2023.
23. Oh my
Yeah. And then
god.
I think I think I signed the contract around October
Hmm.
23, and then I initially wanted to press for a November 24 release,
Yeah.
but just as a function of me being in graduate school, and
Mm.
uh, that was a busy year, so I was like, we can push it back, and so we settled on then March of 25, and that also ended up coinciding with AWP.
Look at
Um,
you with the big
yeah,
move there. Okay.
so really wanted to just have the book out by AWP so that people could, people in my community could read it, and I could give copies to people at the conference.
That's what really good timing. That's very fortunate.
Yeah, yeah.
um, what's that like? So it's like, so you're like, you're going through school and it's like, all right, I have a book coming out, but it's not coming out for a while. Like do you? How does your relationship with the book change just with that much time kind of in between getting the poem? Because let's be honest. So if you have the collection and all of this is happening in 23, these are poems that you probably wrote in like 22 or
Yeah,
20,
22, 2018.
right? So it's like these poems
Yeah,
have already like they're you, but it's a different you.
it is a different me. One thing I really liked about Yes offer, which a bunch of publishers about that size and bigger have, is that they really want to take you through an editing process. And so, it didn't matter that a poem had been written in 2020 and it was, 2024, 4 years later. Um, I had a process where there was another set of eyes reading it and asking questions and giving suggestions. And
Mm,
so that was really important for me because, some of the poems, um, I looked at a while and maybe hit a brick wall with.
yeah.
Um, but it was working with the editor that there's a few poems, especially that I was able to push to the next level. I was really grateful for that.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit more closely about the book itself then. So one of the things I noticed, so one of the things when you actually get the book, you'll see there's a couple different sections. What is it, like four sections? Five
I think
sections.
yeah, 4 or 5.
Yeah. Um, how how did you even know that you're like, oh, I'm going to need sections for this book?
I mean, I think I looked at how other books are put together. Um, read a lot of contemporary poetry books, and sections are like a thing now. And I think that I was trying to think of how to. I think early on, thinking about that in the context of the reader experience. But I think thematically it works as well with the whole undead theme.
Hmm.
It's not going to be all at once. There's like an arc, there's like a trajectory, and the section breaks sort of help with that. Um, yeah,
I know you're interested in film as well. How do you think that
yeah.
how do you think that kind of colored your formatting of the book?
That's a good question. I don't think that the book maybe has like a film structure. It maybe has a film structure in the way that it kind of has a narrative structure, or like there's a more narrative arc with the ideas that are going on. Where at the beginning there's sort of like an introduction, and then there's like a problem, and then it's sort of more poetical, where you just sort of meander through the problem for a bit, and it becomes simpler or more complicated, and then at the very end there's sort of like there's sort of a resolution, I would say, without giving
Mm,
away too many spoilers.
hmm.
So that way has a cinematic quality. But yeah, certain poems, I mean, the theme of the undead shows up in a lot of film,
Right.
and the book makes references to films like, Night of the Living Dead.
Hmm.
It makes reference to shows like The Walking Dead. And so, in that way, it is also in conversation with film.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that there's, a certain way that film definitely shows image, and the book, I think, definitely is in conversation with images
Hmm.
in sort of like a cinematic way sometimes, not all
Hmm.
the time.
Right. I think the big thing that stood out to me with film, especially like the horror genre. I mean, you're just even bringing up zombies. Like a lot of times when we're thinking about that, we're thinking horror movies. Um, which kind of leads me to my next series of questions. So I'm curious about your relationship with a couple of different themes. So I kind of just want to rack your brain on them. So, firstly, what would you say is your relationship with zombies?
Yeah, I mean, I think my relationship zombie is sort of like being like in the middle, because on my mom's side, I'm Haitian. My mom's Haitian, and the initial like folklore or mythology other zombie comes from Haiti. And then, of course, through kind of like American intervention, they become aware of it. And then, it starts popping up in, uh, I guess it would be Hollywood movies like White Zombie in the 30s.
Hmm.
And then, now everyone knows some sort of zombie show, zombie video game, zombie movie, whether it's, highbrow or more like, just lowbrow, um, gore fest.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, so now it's sort of become, at least in American pop culture, a thing. And so, as an African American, as a Black American, I felt like very much at the intersection of that.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm. Are there any like kind of just bringing in the cultural history of zombie and kind of exploring it with all those different lenses, including those that you mentioned? Like, is there a specific aspect of zombies that you wanted to incorporate or to make known to people that maybe would be overlooked if you only saw it through, especially a more modern lens?
That's a good question. I mean, it is something that is evolving.
Yeah.
Um, I think the special nuance is maybe sort of like it being in conversation with the idea of Afro pessimism.
Mm-hmm.
Like Black people just sort of, despite any sort of progress, experiencing what you call like a social death, but then the zombie intervenes in sort of like social undeath and sort of like
Mm-hmm.
being socially dead, but also still being alive, like, still having human experience, even thriving
Mm-hmm.
under this sort of, you know, monster in the room. Um, and so I think the zombie figure kind of, the zombie figure, which is like a Haitian Black invention, is sort of like a metaphysical or what do they call that genre? Like a magical realism,
Mm-hmm. Hmm.
complication that isn't as pessimistic, but it's sort of like definitely a condition to contend with
Hmm.
and to wrestle with. Yeah,
Hmm. Hmm. I think that leads smoothly into the next part as well, because if we're talking about zombies, then we're naturally talking about contention between life and death. How would you describe your relationship with death?
relationship with death. I mean, it's definitely not abstract, of course. There's a few family members in the book, or references to family members in the book that died. I think mostly, yeah, most of them at a younger age. Um, and there's a horror to that, but them being family, that's also attached to a grief, which is attached to a love. Um, and what happens when one is in community and you lose someone, or in family and you lose someone. Um, and then death is, at least for me spiritually, I'm still invested in the notion of the afterlife, and so the theme of the undead sort of helps articulate that as well, because even though someone is dead, if they're undead, they're still among us,
Hmm.
and so with a zombie, that's in like a creepy way, but poetically that becomes more familiar, sort of like something that makes one feel good.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Hmm. There is a beauty to it, right? And
yeah,
there is also kind of a comfort in the discomfort at the same time,
yeah,
And I think it's something that it's just something that's so prevalent in the community that just keeps coming back by choice and not by choice. And so being able to revisit it does kind of almost like zombify it, right? Like it keeps we gotta keep we can't forget,
yeah,
you know. We gotta
yeah.
keep moving with it. Um, one of the things, and I think it especially came through in like the second half of the book, is kind of talking about conversations about language, conversations about
Mm.
English, conversations about, like Creole things. So how would you describe your relationship with language and maybe more specifically with English?
Yeah, I really am glad you asked that question. I think my relationship with language is sort of tricky. I grew up in a household where people spoke Haitian Creole, but I think my mom opted not to teach me, uh, kind of based on her experience, because she had a hard time growing up, in her era as a child, as like a sort of child of Caribbean immigrants, right? And so I think I learned sort of French because a lot of, I don't know if a lot, but Haitian people do speak French
Yeah,
as a result to Haitian Creole, but it's not the same.
right.
And so more recently Haitian Creole, I think it's like on Duolingo or something,
Mm,
as opposed to when I was in high school. But I didn't have that experience, and so as a result, sort of English is kind of like the only way for me to sort of express um, my feelings.
mm,
Uh, the relationships between community, between a society. Um, but there's a way in which you know English itself is like an undead thing. I think, um,
wow. Can you
or
elaborate on that?
yeah, because I mean, I think I think this goes back to sort of like the Afro pessimism.
Hmm.
If the only way that you're able to express yourself as a black person is in the sort of language where you don't have uh, that is yours but is not yours.
Right.
Um, there's sort of a tension there, um, and to I'm sure a lot of people feels like a trap, but also I think there's sort of like a weird thing with language where like how they talk in like Shakespeare's time, like 500 years ago.
Hmm.
They don't talk like that now, and I think a lot of, well, not a lot, but if you're a writer, I think people used to talk about, oh, writing's like a way to be immortal. But I think like 500 years from now, they might look at the poems that we write as like some sort of old English, like as far as
Hmm.
we know, especially if AI has its way.
Oh God.
So
Don't take me down different. Right.
there's a way in which language becomes part of the undead conversation.
It does.
Like
Mhm.
how long can you know how long in the future will people be able to just read your poem, even if English continues? You know, how
Mhm.
long before it's just like old English to people?
Mhm.
And I think that's very briefly the book wrestles with that
Mhm.
notion.
What a great concept that our writing doesn't make us immortal. Our writing makes us undead, and differences between those. This is
Yeah.
really. I see you out here, Bry. Okay. What a great. No, it's really interesting to bring that up. So like I teach English, as a second language to people learning it, and it's that idea of like English being something that's undead really resonates because a lot of people who learn English that aren't in an English speaking context they're approaching the language almost from an undead way. They're not interested in the culture. They're not interested in the history. They're interested in the function,
Yeah.
right? So it's like what's a language is an aspect of culture. So what is a language? Like if you take the heart out of language, what does it become, It's like what you mentioned about just like the undead and like approaching almost like a zombie or something you get out of like a horror film is like really interesting. Um, I know we're going up against time, but a couple final questions for you. How would you describe right now your relationship with poetry? And I want to add on to that because you've been in the poetry game for a while, man. You were at Michigan.
Yeah.
You're wrapping up Cave soon. You know, you're in this program now. That's a long time to be in the game. Um, how would you describe your relationship with poetry right now?
I mean, I think yeah, I've been in poetry a long time. I did sort of high school slam as well. So I mean, I count that. But I think there's sort of three things have happened in the past year. Um, I think, fortunately, I've been able to just read more and more as part of my program. Um, and then I think if you read enough, you come across some texts where you're just like, I've kind of like read this before, but then you come across a text that really challenges you and makes you expands what you think is possible.
Mm,
And the Descent of Alette by Alice Notley, rest in peace, because she passed recently. But I, I've read dozens, if not a couple hundred poetry books by now, and I'd never read anything like that.
mm.
So definitely recommend for people who are into poetry. I don't know if it's for beginners, but uh, shout out to Alice Notley. Um, I think that also I had sort of like a gimmick. I don't know. It feels kind of gimmicky, but it sort of was. It made me realize that I was sort of at a different place with writing. I think usually, you like sort of write one poem at a time. Of course, this is
Mm.
normal. And then one day I just had the thought, like, what if you could write more than one poem at a time?
Okay.
Um, and that just sort of kind of shifted my idea about writing, because it's sort of like, you could write a poem and also be working on a short story and be thinking about an essay. But as far as I know, people haven't said anything otherwise. They might
Hmm.
do this already, but people typically like write one poem at a time.
Hmm.
Um, and especially because I've been dealing mostly with projects because I've been in school,
Yeah.
that sort of sets you up to be thinking of working conversations with each other. So
Hmm.
I think it
Hmm.
just became easy to think about, oh, like, what if I could write more than one poem at a time? Um, and that felt like that unlocked something for me. Um, and I think the last thing was just that I actually realized that I did not have a writing practice.
Mm.
I sort of had a project practice where I think that's sort of like you consume, you read a lot, and then you think of an idea and then you write, and then you're in school or you're in class or your workshop and you get feedback and then you revise.
Mhm.
But a writing practice where writing is my job, I'm going to write 5 days a week, you know regardless of what I'm consuming, um, or I'm going to write and revise 5 days a week. I realized that I didn't have that, and the processes that I had for grad school were fine, but I think to move on to a career, uh, one needs their own sort of writing practice. Not like if you're writing 5 days a week. Shout out to the 4 day week. We're,
Let's
we're
go.
moving. Hopefully, we'll all be moving into that. But yeah, I think having a writing practice is a different thing than I think some people have in their head, and I think I need to build one very soon.
It's you mentioned that you have a year left in your program to me earlier. I think that's the I to be clear, I do not have my MFA. I don't have my doctorate. But just being
You don't
adjacent
you
to so
don't
many
need
people.
one.
You don't, no, for sure. No, I am I am good. But just from in some ways it's kind of I don't want to say dangerous, but I do think that if people are considering MFA programs or writing programs, and maybe you can speak to this too, is that we have to realize that they're also kind of bubbles. You know, you're in this world that's dedicated entirely to writing, which is great, wonderful. What are you going to do after it? Because the bubble can be temporary, you
Yeah.
know? And so, and that's where a lot of people fall off. Like the amount of people who go into these programs and then a year later are still, whatever their art is, still doing the art, whether it's writing or painting or drawing or um, whatever it may be. It's really hard, right? Because you in school you got the time, they give you the time. When you're out of school and you got a job and maybe you got a family and like a bunch of other things happening, it's the discipline game becomes much more significant.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, that's
um,
real. That's real.
you um, do you think that how do I put it? How do you feel like the program you're in right now, and even the book that just came out? How do you think that's preparing you for your writing future?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I'm in the creative PhD at USC, um, and I think sort of the intersection with kind of like literary scholarship puts you in a good space because you're able to just, research is for a lot of people just reading, but you're just able to like bring like a research element to it. Um, I think there's something that's said about craft and just continuing to hone your craft. But I think there's a way in which research allows you to just see different nuances, different dimensions, and bring in different different disciplines, right? So,
Hmm.
going back to film, like being in conversation with film, doing research on that,
Yeah.
um, and different kinds of poetry, like documentary poetry,
Mm.
eco poetry, like getting like deep into the history of Black poetry, being able to parse through theory a bit more.
Mm.
Um, and even, like they say the best art is steal. So, stealing from other genres, like, the fiction writers, the Black nonfiction writers. Um, so I think that being in the PhD space, you're able to exercise that muscle. Um, and it's not. I don't know if it is like going deep, but it allows you to expand.
Mm.
So I think that going forward, that'll be like really useful.
Do you see yourself crossing genre more now?
Yeah, I think, especially with more so with nonfiction,
Okay.
because I think that the prose poem kind of like sets you up for that. So I think that's sort of like the gateway, but um, I think that I definitely see myself being more easily able to cross genre more now.
So the next book might be essays?
The next book right now has parts where they're
Okay.
essay like structures.
So you've already started. Though I know it might be early in the game. You got a title, maybe?
The working title is The Beekeepers.
I like it.
Yeah.
I like it. Okay. Um, Brian, I don't want to keep you too much longer, man. Let's a final thing about the book. Um, what is something about this book that you want to share with people that maybe we didn't get to touch on today?
Um, I think that I think going back to the idea of artist stealing, I think that the book is definitely homage. You know, I think like great artists steal, but I think great artists are also cognizant of like the conversation around their art or the conversation that their art is going to be a part of. Um, and I think the book is definitely in conversation with a lot of previous artists who have written about the undead in different ways and in different media, nonfiction, uh, fiction, poetry, movies, TV. Um, and so I'm happy that also, along with stealing, um, the book is. and tries to be a part of a conversation, an ongoing conversation. And so I think that's what I hope people see.
Mhm.
But if they don't see, then I said it here. I said it here.
I think it's there. In my
Okay.
opinion, it's apparent. Um, and what a great tradition to add your name to, man. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
cool. Brian, I'm gonna close this out. Hang tight, and I'll be with you in a minute. Okay.
All
Um,
right.
but thank you, Brian. Thank you guys for hanging out with us. Again, if you have other questions for Brian that you'd like me to forward to him in the future, feel free to just leave a comment in the chat or things like that afterwards. And we'll see you guys later. Thanks for Brian being with us. You guys have a good day. Have a good night. Have a good afternoon. Take care.